In a country where nearly 1 million lives were lost in just 100 days, where children grew up haunted by names they no longer dared to speak. How could two teenagers, one from a family of perpetrators, the other a survivor, ever find common ground? This is not just a story about juice. It's about trauma, trust, and the courage to believe in something new. In the ashes of genocide, they started a business. But what they built was more than money. To understand how it all began, we need to go back to a broken time and a broken place. Rwanda, 1994. In just over 3 months, nearly 1 million people, mostly Tutsis, were killed. Neighbors turned on neighbors. Friends became enemies. And when the killing stopped, silence was all that remained. Entire families were gone. Children roamed the streets alone. And hatred, though buried, was still burning beneath the surface. The government was rebuilding. Roads, schools, systems of justice. But trust? That couldn't be built with bricks. Rwanda was not just a country in ruins. It was a soul searching for peace. In small villages, programs began to bring together the children of victims and the children of perpetrators. Some came with anger, some with shame, but all came with hunger. Hunger for food, hunger for safety, hunger for something more. And in one such village, two strangers would meet, not by fate, but by survival. Emmanuel was 16. He never talked about his father, only that he never came back after the war. His hands were always busy, carving, fixing, trading, and his eyes always watching. He lived with his uncle, though they barely spoke. Every day, Emmanuel woke up before dawn to find food or work, anything that might earn him a meal. He didn't believe in the future. He only believed in today. Aline was 15. She lived with her grandmother in a tiny clay house surrounded by hibiscus bushes. Her parents gone, but her spirit? Unbreakable. She had a loud laugh, a sharp tongue, and a stubborn heart. She remembered the past, every scream, every face, but chose not to let it define her. Instead, she brewed hibiscus tea. For the bitterness to leave, her grandmother said. They met in silence, spoke in glances, and connected not through words but through need. One had the recipe, the other had the firewood, and together they had nothing except a reason to try. Every morning was a test, not of strength, but of will. Emmanuel and Aline didn't plan to become business partners. They planned to survive. The first batch wasn't brewed in a factory. It was made in a rusted pot, over borrowed firewood, stirred with a stick. No sugar, no bottles, just tea and hope. They walked to the market with 4 bottles, sat on the edge of the road, and waited. At first, no one wanted their juice. Why would I buy from them? Who knows where it came from? Hutu girl and Tutsi boy? Don't trust it. Mistrust clung to everything, even a drink. One sale, one sip, one chance. They made a second batch, then a third. Emmanuel found more bottles from a hotel dump. Aline borrowed a pot with a lid. They added ginger, a pinch of sugar, and they gave their drink a name. Ubuzima. It meant life. It wasn't just a drink anymore. It was a message that something beautiful could come from bitterness, that enemies could become partners, that healing could taste sweet. As the weeks passed, the bottles sold faster. 4 became 10. 10 became 30. The juice was cold, sweet, and red like the flower it came from. But what people were really tasting was effort and heart. Soon, shopkeepers asked to sell it on their shelves. School teachers bought it for students. One day, a nurse from a clinic said, "This drink? It reminds people they're still alive." But success brought something neither of them expected. Attention. You need a license. This isn't clean enough. Where's your permission? They saved every franc they earned, bought soap, cleaned their space, borrowed a neighbor's kettle, found a way to boil water longer. They weren't just making juice anymore. They were building something bigger. With each bottle, they hired someone new. First, it was Emmanuel's cousin. He had no shoes, but he was fast. Then Aline's neighbor, whose parents were still missing. Hutu, Tutsi, orphan widow. It didn't matter. In a place where the past divided everyone, a simple juice business had become something else entirely. A family. Aline became the voice. the planner, the bold one; Emmanuel, the builder, the fixer, the steady hands behind every batch. And Ubuzima? It was no longer a hustle. It was a movement. They began offering lessons: how to calculate profit, how to keep records. And every time they hired someone, they said the same thing: we're not here to forget the past. We're here to make something better out of it. The juice traveled beyond their village, then to Kigali, then to places they'd never imagined: cafes, hospitals, refugee centers. Not because it was the best juice, but because it came with a story people wanted to believe in. Along the way, something else began to grow. Not just profit, but love. It wasn't easy. Some still whispered behind their backs, "How can she love him? Don't they remember what happened?" But they weren't trying to erase history. They were rewriting the ending. One drink, one idea, one unlikely partnership had become something extraordinary. Every story with hope eventually meets hardship. For Aline and Emmanuel, it came like a wave, one problem after another. A shipment went bad in the heat. An investor promised help, then vanished. Bottles broke in transit. Someone tried to copy their name and sell fake juice. The worst blow came from within. A former team member accused them of favoritism, said they only helped their kind. For the first time, the divide they thought they'd overcome began to crack back open. Emmanuel questioned whether the business was just a dream. Aline wondered if the love they'd found could survive pressure, jealousy, fear. But then the people spoke, not with money, with memories. The village reminded them why they started. Not to be perfect, not to be rich, but to be a bridge. Time passed. The wounds of the past didn't disappear, but they softened. Like scars, they faded but never left. Today, Ubuzima is more than a drink. It's a school that teaches entrepreneurship to orphans, a women's cooperative that grows and harvests hibiscus, a safe house for girls who lost everything, and a training center for former fighters learning how to live in peace. Aline and Emmanuel never became millionaires, but they became something rarer. Healers. They brewed more than juice. They brewed forgiveness, partnership, and a new way forward for a nation that almost tore itself apart. In the heart of Rwanda, two teens who had every reason to hate chose instead to build. So they started again. Smaller batches, simpler goals, one bottle, one person, one community at a time.